Sarah Calloway stood stiff between her mother and her stepfather, her spine straight as a fence post that had learned not to bend. She had turned 21 that morning, and her mother had wasted no time calling it a shameful age for a woman with no husband. In Margaret Calloway's eyes, Sarah was already used up, too old, too sharp, too wrong in every way that mattered. Her body bore the marks of hard years. Her shoulders were narrow, her hips slim, her hands rough and scarred from work meant for animals and men. The sun had darkened her skin, and her hair was pulled tight at the back of her head, not from vanity, but from habit. There was no softness to her, no gentle curve or shy smile that men in town liked to see. Margaret often said she looked more like a mule than a bride. But Sarah's eyes told a different story. They were clear and bright, filled with thought and quiet fire. They watched everything, they remembered everything, and they dared anyone to tell her she had no worth. Margaret wiped her hands on her apron and spoke as if Sarah were not standing there at all. She said the girl had been nothing but trouble since birth. She said Sarah ate too much, worked wrong, talked back, and took up space meant for better people. Every word landed like a blow delivered with calm precision. Her stepfather Vernon added his own poison. He said Sarah had a sharp tongue and a stubborn will. He said she only needed to be broken down and put to work under a firm hand. He smiled when he said it, showing yellow teeth and eyes dulled by drink. Standing in front of them was Silas Drummond, a man with greasy hair and a face marked by old scars. He owned the Red Lantern on the edge of town, a place known for cards, whiskey, and women who no longer had choices. He weighed a leather pouch of coins in his hand and grinned, as if this were a fine bargain. He reached for Sarah's arm, already claiming what he believed he had bought. He told her it was time to earn her keep properly. Sarah did not cry, she did not beg, she did not plead. She looked at her mother, searching for even the smallest sign of doubt. She found none. Margaret's face held only relief, like a farmer selling off a worn-out animal. Around them townsfolk gathered, miners, drifters, men with nothing to lose and nothing to protect. They laughed and shouted, turning her pain into sport. Sarah set her jaw and stared straight ahead. She would not give them the gift of her tears. If this story is touching your heart already, let me know in the comments where you are watching from, and if you have ever gone through something similar. Also, tell me what you would like me to improve in future stories. Then everything changed. From the shadow of a supply wagon stepped a man who did not belong to the town. He moved slowly, with the steady confidence of someone shaped by mountains and silence. His coat was buckskin, worn and patched. A long knife hung at his side. His beard was thick and streaked with gray, and his eyes sat deep beneath the brim of his hat. He carried a heavy pack of furs over one shoulder. The crowd parted without being told to. Something about him demanded space. He stopped directly in front of Silas Drummond, blocking the path to the wagon. Silas sneered and asked what business a mountain man had in town affairs. The stranger set his pack down with a dull thud. The furs were fine, worth more than most men earned in a year. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and steady. He said that if Sarah was so worthless, then he would take her, not for drink serving, not for selling her body. He said he would build her a house with his own hands. He said she could stay if she wished, or leave if she chose. Free. The street fell silent. Margaret's face tightened with anger. She said no one had the right to interfere. The mountain man answered that he had already done so. He turned his eyes to Sarah. They were not cruel. They were not hungry. They held something she had never seen directed at her before: respect. He told her she could walk away right then if she wanted. No one would stop her, but if she came with him, he promised that no one would ever treat her as property again. Sarah's heart pounded. Her hands trembled. No one had ever given her a choice before. She nodded once. The man turned and walked toward the edge of town. Sarah followed him without looking back. No one tried to stop them. By the time the trees swallowed the road behind them, Virginia City felt like a bad dream she had finally woken from. They traveled into the mountains, where the air grew clean and sharp. Sarah rode a tired mule and waited for the cruelty to appear, for the kindness to vanish. It never did. The man spoke little. He walked. He shared water. He never rushed her. At dusk they reached a clearing. A half-built cabin stood there, rough and unfinished. A fire pit waited cold and dark. The man told her the truth. This was not comfort yet. But it could be. She could stay and help build, or he would take her back at dawn. No questions asked. She asked why. He said because the choice was hers. That night, wrapped in his spare coat, Sarah slept without fear for the first time in her life. She did not know it yet, but the mountains were already changing her fate. Morning came softly in the mountains. Pale light slipped through the pine branches and rested on the half-built cabin like a promise. Sarah woke slowly, confused by the quiet. No shouting, no slammed doors, no sharp voice telling her she was late or wrong. Only wind moving through trees and the distant call of a bird she did not know. She sat up, clutching the coat around her shoulders, half expecting the safety to vanish. It did not. The mountain man was already awake. He knelt near the fire pit, coaxing flames from cold ash with patient hands. He did not look at her right away. He did not rush her. He simply tended the fire like someone who understood that some things needed time. He handed her a tin cup filled with warm water boiled from the stream. She accepted it carefully, still waiting for the price that kindness always seemed to carry. None came. They ate in silence. Simple food, dried meat, beans. He made sure her portion was full before touching his own. It was a small thing, but it struck her harder than any grand gesture ever could. When they began work, she braced herself for shouting or correction. Instead, he showed her how to lift stones without straining her back. He showed her how to hold an axe so the weight did the work instead of her arms. When she made mistakes, he did not sigh or mock her. He simply adjusted her hands and let her try again. Her muscles burned, blisters formed and broke. Still, something inside her eased. No one was watching to catch her failing. No one was waiting to punish her for learning slowly. Days passed. The cabin walls rose. Logs fit together tighter. Mud filled the cracks. At night they sat by the fire. He always slept outside under the lean-to, even when rain crept in and cold settled deep into the ground. He said she needed space. He said safety mattered more than his comfort. Those words settled into her bones. One evening, as the fire cracked and sparks rose into the dark, she finally asked about him, about the silence, about why he lived alone so far from town. He told her he had once built homes near a river far away. He had a wife who loved wildflowers and hymns, a daughter with her mother's smile. Fever took them both within days. After that, he said, the world grew too loud. The mountains were the only place quiet enough to breathe. Sarah listened, her chest tight with a pain that felt both familiar and new. Then she spoke, slowly at first. She told him her mother had called her a mistake since childhood. She said she had once loved reading until the book was burned. She admitted she could barely remember her letters anymore. He listened without interruption. When she finished, he stood, found a smooth board, and wrote her name in charcoal. He showed her each letter like it mattered, like she mattered. She traced the letters with shaking fingers. When she finished, she pressed the board to her chest and cried silently into the dark. That night, the mountains felt less empty. Far away, Virginia City did not forget her, and trouble was already finding its way up the trail. Autumn settled over the mountains like a slow breath. The air turned sharp and clean. Aspen leaves burned gold and red along the slopes. Each morning, Sarah woke with sore muscles and a quiet sense of pride she had never known before. Her hands were rougher now, but stronger. Her body moved with purpose instead of fear. The cabin took shape day by day. Walls stood firm. The roof held against rain. Smoke rose steady from the stone chimney they built together. It was not grand, but it was real. It was theirs. Sarah planted wildflowers near the doorway, pressing seeds into the soil with care. Every small green shoot felt like proof that she was no longer wasting space in the world. She was making one. Gideon worked beside her in calm silence. He never rushed her, never corrected her with anger. At night he still slept outside, even as the cold crept in. She began to understand that his restraint was not distance. It was respect. Then, one gray afternoon, the mountains went still. Sarah heard hoofbeats before she saw them. The sound rolled through the trees like a warning. Her stomach dropped. Fear rushed back into her body so fast it made her dizzy. 3 riders broke into the clearing. Her mother sat tall in the saddle, her face tight with anger and pride. Vernon slouched behind her, thin and sour. Beside them rode a man with a badge pinned to his coat, watching everything with flat eyes. Margaret dismounted and looked around with open disgust. She called the cabin a hole in the dirt. She said Sarah had finally found the level she belonged to. Gideon stepped down from the porch with his axe in hand. He did not raise it. He did not threaten. He simply placed himself between Sarah and the riders. He told them they were not welcome. Margaret said Sarah was her daughter and still belonged to her. She said blood gave her rights. Gideon answered that Sarah belonged to herself now. Vernon spat into the dirt and said they had come to collect a debt. He said a rancher up north was offering cattle and a wagon for a wife. He said law and custom were on their side. Gideon did not move. He said if Sarah wanted to go, she could. He would never stop her. But they would ask her, not take her. Margaret laughed and called Sarah damaged and ungrateful. Inside the cabin, Sarah stood frozen. Her heart beat so hard it hurt. She could stay hidden. She could let Gideon handle it. He had already done so much for her. But something deep inside her, something that had been silent for 21 years, began to speak. She opened the door and stepped outside. Her hands were dirty from the garden. Her shoulders were back. Her chin was high. She looked at her mother and said she was not going. Margaret snapped that refusal was not allowed. Sarah said no again, louder this time. She said she was not for sale. Not now. Not ever. Vernon stepped forward, his hand reaching out. Gideon shifted just enough for the axe to be seen clearly. It was not raised. It did not need to be. Sarah looked at her mother and told her the truth. She said she had never been raised with love. She said she had been tolerated until Prophet appeared. She said that was not family. That was ownership. The clearing fell silent. Other settlers had gathered at the edge of the trees. Witnesses. Margaret saw them and faltered. Her voice lost strength. She told Sarah she would die alone in the mountains. Sarah answered that if she did, it would be her choice. Margaret cursed and mounted her horse. The riders turned away and disappeared into the trees, leaving only wind and silence behind. Sarah stood shaking, but she did not fall. She had chosen. That night, snow dusted the peaks above them. Winter came early and hard. Hunting grew dangerous. One evening, Sarah heard the mule bray in terror. Gideon stumbled into the clearing, blood dark against the snow. A grizzly had caught him off guard. His wounds were deep. Sarah dragged him inside and took control. She cleaned the gashes. She boiled water. She fed the fire until her arms ached. Fever came and went. Nights stretched long and brutal. She did not leave. She split wood until her hands bled. She broke ice at the stream. She read aloud the few words she knew, steadying both of them. One night, as the storm howled outside, Gideon told her she was stronger than the mountain itself. The words broke something open inside her. When spring finally returned, Gideon healed. Green spread across the hills. Flowers bloomed by the door. Sarah realized she had crossed a line she could never return from. She was no longer someone waiting to be claimed. She was someone who stayed. Spring came rushing back into the mountains like a promise kept. Snow pulled away from the ground in long, shining streams. The forest woke with birdsong and new green growth. Gideon walked without pain again, his strength returning day by day. Sarah watched him move through the clearing and felt something settle inside her, relief, gratitude, something deeper she was not yet ready to name. The cabin stood solid now. Smoke rose clean from the chimney. Flowers Sarah had planted pushed up near the steps, bright against the dark soil. She touched the doorframe each morning as if to remind herself it was real. She had built this place with her own hands. She had chosen it. One warm afternoon, 2 riders appeared on the trail. They were not hostile. Their horses were well cared for, their coats clean. The older man tipped his hat and spoke with respect. He said they were opening a new store in a growing town and needed someone who could read, write, and keep records straight. He handed Sarah a letter sealed with wax. He said it would be fair pay, room and board included, independence, a future built by her own skill. Sarah's chest tightened as she read the words slowly, sounding them out in her head. A real job, a chance to stand fully on her own, no dependence, no fear of being owed or owned. That night she sat by the fire, reading the letter again and again until the words blurred. Gideon carved a piece of cedar in silence. When he finished, he placed it on the table beside her. It was a small wooden compass, smooth and carefully made. The needle pointed true. He told her that if she chose to go, the compass would guide her. Spring was the best time for travel. The trails were clear. Then he said something else. He said if she chose not to go, she should keep it anyway, so she would always know the way back, so she would always have a choice. Sarah felt tears rise. She asked him why he would not ask her to stay. He looked at her with a quiet sadness and told her she was not his to keep. Freedom was the point of everything they had built. 2 mornings later, the wagon came up the trail. Dust rose in the sunlight. The merchant called out and asked if she was ready. Sarah stood there holding the compass. She thought of safety, of ease, of a life that asked nothing more of her than numbers on a page. Then she looked at the cabin, at Gideon standing on the porch, trying to look steady. She shook her head and said she was already where she belonged. She pressed the compass into Gideon's palm and told him she did not need it. She was home. He pulled her into his arms then, careful and certain. It was the first time he held her like that, not as someone he rescued, but as someone he chose. Life grew outward from that moment. The cabin became more than a home. It became a place of learning. Gideon built a long table and benches. Sarah gathered slate and chalk. Children from the valley began to arrive, carrying eggs and flour as payment. Sarah taught them letters she once feared she had lost forever. She taught them gently, patiently. She watched their faces light up as words came alive. On a clear Sunday beneath a tall pine, neighbors gathered. Sarah wore a simple blue dress, wildflowers braided through her hair. Gideon stood beside her, clean shirt pressed, beard trimmed. They spoke vows shaped by truth, not ownership, not duty, choice. That summer, Sarah noticed her body changing. Her appetite grew fierce. Her belly rounded faster than expected. When the midwife came, she smiled wide and said Sarah carried 3 lives. Triplets. Fear and wonder crashed together. Gideon knelt beside her and promised they would manage. Together. Hard months followed. Gideon built and prepared. He carried Sarah when she could not walk. He read to her. He spoke to the children growing inside her as if they could already hear. When the time came, labor was long and brutal. Women from the valley came to help. Gideon never left her side. 3 cries filled the cabin before dawn. 2 boys and a girl, small, perfect, alive. Sarah wept as she held them. Gideon cried openly, holding his family like something sacred. The cabin that had once been silent now breathed with life. Sarah Calloway had been sold as useless. She became a mother of 3, and this was only the beginning. The cabin learned new sounds that first winter after the babies were born. Crying, soft coos, tiny breaths in the dark. The fire burned day and night, never allowed to die. Gideon moved through the room with quiet care, lifting one child while rocking another. His broad shoulders bent gently under a weight he welcomed. Sarah's body healed slowly. Carrying 3 babies had changed her in ways that would never fully fade. Her back ached. Her strength returned in pieces. Some mornings she felt fragile as glass. Other mornings she felt unbreakable. She learned to accept both. They named the boys Samuel and Joseph. Strong names. Names that carried memory and hope. The girl they named Rose, breathing new life into a name Gideon once thought buried forever. When he said it aloud, his voice never shook again. The valley folk came often. Women brought food and blankets. Men repaired fences and hauled firewood. No one asked why. They simply showed up. Sarah watched strangers become family and felt something deep settle into place. As the babies grew, so did the cabin. Gideon built 3 cradles, each carved with care. A bear, an elk, a bird. He sang to them at night, his voice rough but steady, old songs passed down through generations. The children slept best when he sang. Sarah taught, even with the child on her hip, letters scratched onto slate, names spoken aloud until they stuck. The children from the valley sat beside her own, learning side by side. No one was turned away. Seasons passed like water over stone. The triplets learned to walk, then to run. Samuel climbed everything he could reach. Joseph watched first, thoughtful and careful. Rose refused to be left behind, stubborn and bright. The cabin grew rooms. A real kitchen, a schoolroom, a workshop. Chickens scratched beneath the porch. A garden spread green and full. Fruit trees took root and grew tall. Word traveled far. People said the woman once sold as worthless taught children better than any school in the territory. They said the mountain man built things that would outlast generations. They said the clearing in the mountains had become something rare, a place where people were seen. Years layered themselves gently. The children grew tall. Samuel became a carpenter like his father. Joseph learned every trail and stream. Rose followed her mother's path, opening a school of her own. On quiet evenings, Sarah and Gideon sat on the porch watching the sun slide behind the peaks. They held hands. They did not need words. Sarah once asked if he ever regretted giving her a choice. Gideon told her that choice had saved them both. She smiled and rested her head on his shoulder, surrounded by a life built from freedom, patience, and love that asked nothing but truth. Time moved the way it always does in the mountains. Quietly, steadily, one season folding into the next without asking permission. Sarah's hair turned silver strand by strand. Gideon's back curved slightly with age, though his hands remained strong and sure. The cabin stood weathered but firm, its logs darkened by years of snow, sun, and smoke. It had been built with patience, and patience had kept it standing. The triplets grew into adults, shaped by the land that raised them. Samuel worked wood with the same calm focus as his father, building homes that carried warmth in every beam. Joseph knew the mountains like a second skin, guiding travelers safely through passes that once terrified grown men. Rose carried her mother's gift forward, teaching children across the valleys, her voice steady and kind. The school Sarah began never closed. Even when her steps slowed, her words never did. Children still gathered at long tables, their hands dusty with chalk, their faces bright with discovery. She taught them that learning was not power over others, but power within themselves. On cool evenings, when the air smelled of pine and the sky burned orange at sunset, Sarah and Gideon sat side by side on the porch they had built together. They watched birds settle into trees. They listened to the mountain breathe. Once Gideon asked her if she ever thought about the life she might have lived if she had taken the job in town. Sarah looked at the cabin, at the land, at the path her children had walked into the world. She told him she had never been tempted by easier ground. She said the mountains had given her something no town ever could. A voice, a place to stand, a life chosen, not assigned. Gideon squeezed her hand and told her she had done the same for him. He said she had taught him how to build again, how to speak again, how to live again. Years later, when Sarah's hands grew stiff and her voice softened with age, she sat in the same rocking chair Gideon had built when she carried their children. Grandchildren climbed onto her lap. Great-grandchildren listened with wide eyes. She told them about the day she was sold, about the mountain man who offered her a choice, about the cabin that began as shelter and became a sanctuary. She told them never to let the world decide their worth. She said worth was built, choice by choice, day by day. When Sarah passed, the mountain held her gently. Gideon followed not long after. They were buried beneath the tallest pine on the ridge, where the wind sang through branches like a quiet blessing. The cabin still stands. People say you can feel something there, a steadiness, a warmth, proof that love rooted in respect can outlast cruelty, proof that one choice can change everything. Sarah Calloway was once called useless. She became a mother of triplets, a teacher of hundreds, a woman who mattered. And the mountains remember her name. If this story moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more emotional love and breakup stories that will touch your soul.